The Big Ten and the SEC are about to monopolize the bids to the college football playoff. What does this mean for the ACC?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, alongside Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. Thank you so much for making us your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On this loaded episode, we'll get a prediction from our special guest on ACC champion in football next year and who's going to contend with the favorite to win that ACC championship. Is the ACC getting left behind when it comes to the revenue gap? Because it's not just a revenue gap, Kenton. You also, as we'll talk about, the SEC and the Big Ten, who've got that leverage because they have threatened to leave the college football playoff and do their own thing. They want to hog the bids. So when we talk about the CFP, it's going to expand to 14, maybe even 16, probably 14. So then you would think, oh, that's going to mean more possible bids for the ACC and the Big 12. Apparently not. Apparently that's just going to mean more bids for the SEC and the Big 10, which I know, Kenton, does not surprise you in the least.
Well, it just means more, Donno. It'll always mean more to the Big
more
10.
Bids.
And you know, I think the most interesting thing about these bids and how they're being distributed is, again, when you do the math, when you break down the math on how it fundamentally happens, right? Is this for the 14 or 16 team playoff? Just out of curiosity here, because I know that they already extended to 14.
Either. I don't think they've decided which way they want to do it, if they want to expand it. And honestly, if I'm the ACC and the Big 12, I would be lobbying to expand to 16, because if it would be 4 automatic bids for each of the Big 10 and the SEC either way, obviously then you'd want to have the biggest possible playoff because that's the most spots for your teams to grab.
Let me tell the ACC and the Big 12 this as calmly as I can. Let them take their damn ball and go home. Let them tell the world, hey, we are so much better than everybody, we refuse to play these guys. Because they said, hey, give us a fair and equitable split. Make them say that out loud. Oh, well, we thought that we deserved more of the money, when in reality, time and time again, when you put these things up to the smell test, it doesn't pan out. When, again, everybody keeps telling me, I keep hearing from all of these coaches, you know, Lane Kiffin, not different conferences. It's like different leagues. Quick question, Donno, when's Ole Miss's last national championship?
I don't have a big enough calendar or sports almanac to find it. Did they ever won a championship 100 years ago? Maybe. I mean, they honor the team that Eli Manning was on that didn't win anything.
Okay, well, Shane Beamer, you know, even though his daddy coached in the ACC, you know, he's always talking about, oh man, you know, playing in 50, 40, 100,000 stadiums. We've already debunked that myth, but where are the Gamecocks' last national championship? They had to win one with Spurrier, right? Jadeveon Clowney,
No.
He got him one, right? He didn't.
No.
What about but the Lattimore guy that was there? He was a really good running back. He didn't get him one. Alshon Jeffrey didn't get him one.
Nope.
So it seems to me that lots of people are happy to beat their chest about conference pride, but again, it boils down to they have 2 or 3 of the top teams, and we're supposed to believe that those 2 or 3 top teams have some divine God-given right to stay at the top for forever. Well, I'm sorry to inform you all, there will come a day for all of you where the guy who was the great one ain't walking through that door no more. Bama learned the hard way, losing to Oklahoma and putting up. There were as many points scored by Alabama in that game as we have hosting guests today. And so, you know, everybody has their day where eventually you come back down to earth and are human. So I think it's very interesting and very funny that, these conferences, they're just so much above you that they're going to deserve it for forever. Well, okay, take away your top 2, 3 teams. How many national championships do you have? When's your last one? I'd love to know. I'd really and truly love to know that.
Florida with Tebow, maybe, or Auburn with Cam Newton.
Well, last time I checked, Tebow just got to finally consecrate a marriage, and Cam Newton's on his 12th kid. I don't think either one of them are walking through that door anymore. I'm just saying. I have no problem with, hey, we have gone out and we have proven we are better than y'all. We have gone out and we have shown it. We as a conference, not 2 or 3 teams, all of us from top to bottom have shown, hey, our mid-tier teams will whoop the wheels off your best. Our low-tier teams will whoop hey, I got to accept it. I got to acknowledge it. But for some reason, these narratives never seem to hold water. And I hate to throw shots at a fellow conference that is seen as a lesser conference with us. But remember when everybody said, oh, man, the Big 12 has so many games scheduled against the Sun Belt. And then those Sun Belt teams went on to beat 3 of the Big 12 teams, including one of the teams that was in their conference championship. Funny things happen when you just line it up.
Yeah, well, let me introduce our special guest, who is the host of the Portal podcast. They talk everything transfer portal, NIL, recruiting. Brian Smith is with us, who also hosts Locked On Seminoles. And okay, so Brian, you hear about it. We'll talk a little bit more about these reports now about how the SEC and the Big Ten, they've exercised their leverage before by threatening to leave the college football playoff and do their own thing. And now they're trying to exercise that leverage into getting 4 automatic bids apiece into the college football playoff. Do you think, Brian, like Kenton suggests, can the rest of these conferences, can they call their bluff, or can the CFP call their bluff, or do the Big Ten and SEC just have too much power and leverage?
Nobody has exclusivity. I think that there's going to be some backroom discussions, and at some point there'll be something more concrete. The rankings are what's interesting. I read the article from Ross Dellinger, and he does a great job, but at the same time, there's only so many spots, and you can't give this specific number in a year your league is down. That's how you get problems. Yeah. And that's why I don't think, even the SEC was a little bit down last year. Quarterback play, it was a little down. And that's why teams that went 9-3 didn't get the benefit of the doubt. Okay, sorry, Alabama, you shouldn't lose to Vanderbilt. You know what I mean? Sorry, Ole Miss, you lost at home to Kentucky. They won 4 games. Okay, shut up. That's just the way it is. So you need to have that. This is the way it should. Now, if you were putting the language, barring something unforeseen, we get 4 teams minimum. But, you got to make it real specific, because, coaches are going to scream. Beamer was going nuts at South Carolina. They don't have any cachet, because like Kenton said, their program has sucked for eternity. It just has. Now, they're good now, but they don't have any cachet. It is what it is. You need to be definitive with it. And I don't think these schools are going to just sign off and, you can just have power. Nobody does that in any walk of life. Why would you? Why would you concede your power? It's absolutely not sensical at all.
Well, and there's another layer to this. I want to go over the Ross Dellinger article in Yahoo that Brian referenced, where if this thing goes to the SEC's desired plan, how this could hurt the ACC and the Big 12 even further. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. We got Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack, Brian Smith from the Portal Podcast. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Guys, I'm only getting started with FanDuel. I have so much fun on this app. I'm on it pretty much all day, every day. I know Kenton knows that's true because, folks, on the FanDuel Sportsbook, we're getting all of this incredible NBA action right now. When the game tips off, the NBA is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Whether you were just betting all-star game props, and now NBA regular season is going to be resuming here in the next couple of days, FanDuel is the place you want to be at, my friends. You can place live bets throughout the game. Even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in that action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out our other shows. Kenton hosts Locked On Wolfpack. I host Locked On Canes. Brian Smith hosts the Portal Podcast and Locked On Seminoles. All of these shows are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. So here's part of the Ross Dellinger piece for Yahoo Sports. Within the SEC and Big Ten, he writes, the momentum is building to further expand the playoff to 14 or 16 teams. Assign multiple automatic qualifiers per league, as many as 4 each for themselves, and finalize a scheduling agreement together that may fetch millions in additional revenue from TV partners. The playoff format change would clear the way, he says, for the SEC administrators to finally make the long-discussed move to play 9 regular season conference games and would trigger perhaps all 4 power leagues to overhaul their conference championship weekend. So, fellas, and I'll get Brian's take on this first. There's a couple other details there that I see will have a domino effect on the ACC. First, when they talk about a scheduling alliance between the SEC and Big Ten, that means they're going to play more non-conference games against each other and theoretically less against the ACC. And then also the part for the SEC about expanding to 9 conference games. You know what that means, because all the SEC coaches always say, they want to make their non-conference schedules easier. So if they expand to play an extra conference game, guess what? Alabama is not going to want to play Clemson or, Miami as often as they would, or Florida State, right? So that's going to have an effect on TV ratings for teams within the ACC.
I think 2 things point from that. Number one, you're right. A lot of the coaches don't want it. Ironically, Saban called for this for a long time, and I give him credit. He thought that they should go to 9 games, but that's beside the point now because he's retired. But if they want to go to 9, 2 things. Number one, you're going to see a lot of coaches not be as desirable to head for SEC jobs. They're going to think it's too hard. That'll hurt the league in that respect. Okay. I think there'll be some coaches. Yeah. Now the guys that are already there are there, but there'll be guys who are like, why do I want to go through this? Secondarily, there's about 0% chance you're going to have an SEC championship game very much longer. If you're going to have that many meaningful games, they're going to worry about attrition. And I wouldn't blame them on that. Just getting beat up, LSU versus Alabama, Texas A&M against Florida. It's those kind of games early December on top of that schedule, that'd be rough because 9 SEC plus like a Big Ten game. What about like South Carolina? They already play Clemson. That's their in-state right. Like they would get 1 crap game if you're South Carolina. That's not a good gig for you. Like South Carolina's up right now, but how long is that going to last? So there's going to be a lot of things about this that are being talked about that I got a feeling they're going to peel back the onion and some people aren't going to like it so much.
Well, it means more down there. So, you should play tougher games. But I will say this. I'm not as concerned about the potential breaking of ties and rivalries if they get an extra conference game as I am getting rid of conference championships altogether. I'm a big believer in settle it on the field, okay? If the ACC was not allowed to settle it on the field this year, SMU walks out as your conference champion. Now, does that mean that I'm taking a shot at SMU? Everybody knows how much I love the Pony Express, how much I love them boys down there in Dallas. I hope them all the best. I wish them all the success. But I'm a big proponent of being consistent as well. And if I say the SEC has to line it up and prove it every year, the Big Ten has to line it up and prove it every year, I believe the same thing for the ACC. There should be no getting rid of conference championships. There should always be a line it up. I don't care how you undefeated. The second team is a 4-loss team. Oh, well, that's how the cookie crumbles. Looks like you need to keep undefeated 1 game longer against a team with a bunch of losses. I'm a huge believer in that, and anything that is antithetical to that is antithetical of me because I'm all about competing. I was the same way when I heard, if you do this, if you leave SMU out, it'll decentivize teams playing in the conference championship game. Hell no. I compete at every opportunity you get. And if adding in a conference game means that you have to take away a conference championship, then what are we doing as conferences to say, oh, no, we no longer want to line it up because we've done it enough? What? All of the stuff that Herb Street and company talked about, players sitting out and said, oh, what happened to the days where you wanted to compete? It would be the worst thing that ever happened to college football for these teams to decide, or for these conferences to decide, rather, hey, non-conference games is enough. That's how we'll figure out our champion.
You know, Brian, I like the way the ACC's championship format is right now, because I actually like that they got rid of divisions, because like a lot of years, you know, the Atlantic division was just better, or at least top heavier than the Coastal. So it's like you're just going to force the Coastal champion to play the Atlantic champion when, you know, both Florida State and Clemson a lot of years were more deserving than the Coastal champion. So I like the ACC's conference championship format right now. I don't know if you caught this, Brian, a few weeks ago when like Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, was hypothesizing, hey, maybe the top regular season team will sit out and we'll have 2 versus 3 in the championship game, so we don't jeopardize the top regular season teams play. I thought that, I mean, hopefully he was just thinking out loud, but some thoughts should not be said out loud, in my humble opinion.
He's done a lot of dumb things.
Yeah.
That one ranks very high.
Yeah. To even suggest it.
I mean, that means you don't believe in your conference, and you don't believe that other people believe in your conference, and you're making it worse by throwing kerosene on the fire.
He's been in them dark rooms on ayahuasca with Aaron Rodgers. Just because him and Cal got added in, don't mean you got to fully embrace what Cal legends do in order to say we're ingratiated in the conference. You know, we going to have Lawrence Ross on during the season again, but again, that's all the Cal super fan that we need around here. Okay, you need to lay off that stuff, Jimmy P. Again, in all seriousness, I am more for the idea that they would, you know, somehow come up with a way to have the top 4 teams play each other than this idea of, you know, scrap it all together for the top team. If anything, again, I don't know why we keep treating Army Navy like it's the sacred weekend that all of us cannot touch and it's inalienable. Put some more games on there. Go ahead and have your little 4-game mini season right there, and you know, let things kind of shake out where it may from there.
Noon, 3:30, like you could do something in that. You could even do a game like Army Navy could be 11 a.m.
Yeah,
you could do something like that.
Yeah,
maybe you have one of the title games Friday night. The other, there's a couple of different ways to do it. I'd be okay with that.
So, I want you to put on your Locked On Florida State hat for a second here, because I know that one of the things that the ACC is reportedly thinking of doing to kind of, you know, keep Florida State and Clemson a little happier, you know, amid those lawsuits, try to negotiate for a settlement, are these initiatives that would help close that revenue gap. I mean, the Success Initiative is already happening, where if you win on the field and on the hardwood, you know, you get extra revenue if you get into the college football playoff, if you get into a bowl game, et cetera, which I think is a good thing. I mean, let's go out there and earn it on the field. I'm totally cool with that. A little bit more controversial is the brand initiative, which involves if you put up bigger TV ratings. And then also it kind of makes sense to me in a way. I'm not going to completely bash that, because if you're bringing more of the TV revenue, you probably do deserve more money to cut into that revenue gap. But still, the revenue gap as it stands, Brian, is like up to 30 plus million. SEC schools and Big Ten are making over the ACC. From an FSU point of view, the possibility of making more revenue, brand initiative, Success Initiative, is that enough?
I think it is. If you add in, they got to do something in a back channel way, because they felt slighted for so long. Clemson and Florida State, I mean, it wasn't even close. There was no third place for quite a while. I mean, it just was. They carried the league, and they were losing, even though they were competitive. I mean, Florida State won the title in 13, Clemson won 16 and 18, but they weren't getting the same kind of revenue the SEC Big Ten. I mean, that's the question. How do they do that? Nobody ever wants to back pay it. But if you don't, eventually, I think it's 2031 with the next contract for the team, that won't go well for the ACC. So you're going to lose. It's just how much. Pride, don't let your pride get in the way, because you'll end up unemployed. That's my advice.
Yeah, as the old saying go, pride cometh before the fall, almost certainly. But I will say this: the how much more can you capitulate? How much more can you give away? Because we've talked about the success initiative and all that. Okay, great, good, fine, dandy. What more can you give? Don't get me wrong. Yes, Florida State and Clemson carry. I'm an NC State guy, and I will tell you, Florida State and Clemson carry. Not arguing that in any shape, form, or fashion. That happens in every single conference. If you talk about the Big Ten and what they are, right? Fun fact about the Big Ten, we talk about Florida State and Clemson. Take those two away, and what is the ACC? Well, okay, let's do that to the Big Ten. Ohio State, Michigan. When's their last championship if you take away Michigan, Ohio State?
Penn State
Oh, yeah.
in
How many years ago?
1980
Yeah.
when they beat
Before Kenton was born.
I was just about to say, I wasn't alive. I was a twinkle in my father's eye. What are we doing here? So, I'm even if you include the new teams, you say, oh, well, Reggie Bush and company was the last one to win. Guess what?
Right.
I was a small child wearing a Carmelo Anthony jersey and a Ben Wallace jersey at the time, just to show you how long ago that was. So
who could forget Big Ten legend Reggie Bush?
Who could forget him? Who could forget him? So with that in mind, again, I look at this and I say the money is the money. And we all understand that, like you said, Florida State and Clemson carry, but every conference has teams that carry that are not getting their fair due against everybody else. If you look at what Georgia's bringing in versus a Vanderbilt, is it fair that they get the same amount? No, but I do get that you have less complaints when you're at the top of the hill and everybody in your conference is bringing in the 50 million or whatever. I get it. But, I mean, I understand the idea that you need to bridge the gap some way. But, man, I'll tell you what, that's a tough task to ask, Brian, in terms of back paying all that to say, like, hey,
well, they don't have to do it for like a 15-year period, but like whatever that initiative is, Florida State and Clemson should get a big say. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't have to be like, well, cut us a $50 million check. Let's be realistic. Yeah. Now, there are probably some fans for both those schools to think that, but that's not how this works. Because then you also alienate the other members of your conference, and then they don't even want you. Like, you got to be careful with bad blood, too. So there is no great answer here, but Florida State, I mean, it's like a 35-40% difference between the Big Ten and what the ACC makes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're trying to look for a way to close that gap. I get it.
The only argument where this makes sense to me is because players are getting paid. If NIL did not exist, if revenue sharing was not coming down the pipeline, this would be complete and utter rubbish because, again, there's a certain point where if better facilities mean more championships, then Oregon ain't lost a game in about, 12 years, right?
Yeah, their stuff's nasty. Them and Georgia are probably the two best from what I've heard.
But you see what I'm saying? Even if you wanted to throw Georgia in there. So Georgia's won the last 8 national championships, it seems. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, it means something. But again, I will concede now that players are getting paid and the revenue is being shared. These schools do have a much more salient argument to say we need more money. Before it was like the type of football player that a lazy river attracts is not the type that wins national championships. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. I'm sorry to tell you. The type of guy that, oh, my locker looks like a spaceship. The type of guy that attracts is not the type of guy that wins national championships.
Well, I want to pick Brian's brain on this, as Kenton and I have discussed. The Clemson Tigers, favorites to win the ACC next year, early favorites. There's a long way to go unfortunately, there's a long way to go before the college football season starts. But who's going to be the biggest challenge for them? You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on Locked On ACC. Thank you for making us your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On College Football. Spencer McLaughlin does an awesome job taking you through all the big storylines. I know it's the off season now, but there's as Brian Smith knows, hosting the Portal podcast, there's always something to talk about when it comes to college football and college athletics in general. So make sure you check out Locked On College Football, available free where you get your podcasts and free on YouTube. First of all, Brian, do you agree, Clemson, are they your favorite to win the ACC next year? And who else do you think should be in that mix?
I think Miami has the schedule just like they do to possibly go undefeated. Those should be the two favorites. Biggest advantage for Miami there is they don't play South Carolina, but it's not in the ACC. They could still get a little more edge with that because that game would be played right before the ACC title. But I mean, Clemson, I think, got a senior quarterback that started since the middle of his freshman year. Got a pretty good defense. You got help coming in from Purdue off the transfer portal. If I had to pick one, I'd go Clemson. I'd pick Miami second.
Yeah, and Miami opens up with Notre Dame, which is not going to be a picnic, but that's an early season game at least, so they have some time to recover.
That's not considered a conference game either, so it's
right.
It's kind of an interesting deal. That first games are wild. It's really hard to pick that game.
Yeah, and I think it's a hard. I think we're really at a hard place right now in terms of who's supposed to be next in line because I mean, like we talked about on air here earlier in this episode, it was Florida State and Clemson for years. Florida State fell off a cliff last year. Let's just be honest. There's no.
I was the first one to call that now.
You were.
I said 2-3 wins. What happened?
Let me tell you something. We were on The Price is Right, watching little man go up the mountain, go up the mountain, go up the mountain, and then right over. Boy, that one was just a nasty season to watch. And so you're left asking who's going to be the challenger. SMU, who was the challenger last year, they lost everybody on the outside virtually. And again, damn good team, very well coached. If they have another season like that, I would be utterly shocked if one of the high-level Power 4 teams didn't throw Lashley a blank check and say, here, take what you need. We need you. But with that in mind, again, they lost a ton of pieces. A lot of teams that were supposed to be good last year. Virginia Tech was a team that everybody talked about as a dark horse. Things looked bad for them at multiple points in time last season. Louisville is always a team that's in contention. They lost to Stanford last year. The same Stanford that allowed nearly 60 points against NC State. Most points they've ever scored in an ACC game. So, you're sitting here looking, saying who can be that team that week in, week out can be consistent enough. But not only that, because of the way that our conference now functions, you got to line it up against Clemson and beat them. Because we saw SMU had the better regular season. There's no debate there. But when they had to line it up, you had to have the Joes, the Larrys and the Joes to beat Clemson, which they didn't. So, I'm stumped too in terms of who's going to be the team that's going to be gunning for Clemson at the highest clip.
And even I get it. Like Clemson should be able to definitely, because of their history, they should be up there. But we all thought Florida State would be up there heading into last season. We saw what happened. Not that I'm expecting that to happen at Clemson, but it can happen.
Well, last year, Arizona State was picked dead last in the Big 12.
That's right. Yeah.
Dead last.
Yeah.
I mean, in the portal era, you may do well with your NIL and bring in the right guys, and that's great. But you may think you did, like Florida State thought they did, and it just completely caused a rip in the locker room, this and that. That season was over at the end of the fourth quarter, game 2.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you can tell they didn't have any they were hard to watch, let alone analyze. My job last year, I was underpaid. I will go ahead and say that right.
I agree.
I was underpaid.
Get David on the phone. Get him on the phone right now.
So it's a very fine line. One of these teams, maybe Belichick finds a way. Maybe it's somebody else. I don't know who it. Virginia Tech's got a quarterback coming back. They got a pretty good. Yeah. They would be my wild card pick. Have some experience at quarterback as a third team, but now SMU, everybody knows them. They're circling them. It's different being the hunted and not being the hunter.
Yeah.
Way different. So let's see how that goes. Miami's kind of that way normally, but now they had Cam Ward and stuff. It'll be harder for them in some ways. The league is wild. Yeah, I know they do all these things like FanDuel, like over-unders on win totals. Count me out on the AC. Man, that is
and I bet everybody's over-under every year, and I usually win like a third of them. It's hard to predict.
If you're going to skip a year, this would be the one for the ACC. It's going to be
I won't
really
skip
difficult.
it. I'm all in.
I'll tell you, Miami is the only team that I would say has the Larrys and the Joes at a high enough clip that I'm like, hey, they can do it. They got some dudes over there, but even with them, it's like Miami, we say it every year. They've got the guys to be the team. And every year we're stuck at the end of it saying, what the hell went wrong? What went wrong? Everything was right until it wasn't.
I could still see where it says 21-0 on the scoreboard in the Carrier Dome.
Yeah.
And that didn't end up 21-0 as Mitchell.
Well, and I even up at 21-0, I had a bad feeling because I knew Miami, because it was early in the game. It was like first quarter, they're up 20. So I'm like, there's still time for the defensive ball. I'm like, stop the count.
Stop the count. Stop the count.
When you have that little faith in your team, you know it's been a wild ride for the defense. That's terrible.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I appreciate everyone taking the time. And again, Smitty, as we call him, Brian Smith, he's launched the new Portal podcast, which is truly excellent. And it's a lot of stuff that I'm super interested in, and I know you guys are as well. So make sure you check out the Portal podcast. It's part of the Locked On Network. It's free wherever you get your podcasts and free on YouTube. Make sure you check out Kenton's awesome work with Grayson Boone on Locked On Wolfpack. Make sure you check me out at Locked On Canes. And we'll talk to everyone again tomorrow in another episode of Locked On ACC. We're part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.